Dealing with the Locker Thief in High School, by user Donachius. This was back in the early 2000s, probably 2003 to 2004 school year. Throughout the entire year there was a crime wave of people having things stolen out of their locked lockers. Not everyone, but enough that everyone knew someone it happened to. The school's only defense about this was that it was our fault for sharing locker combos with our friends. They also charged us every time we had to get the combination changed on a locker, like after a theft for instance, because it was assumed to be our fault. Well, I had my graphing calculator taken out of my locker. I also never gave out my combination to anyone. Mostly because my friends were jackasses and we pulled shit on each other all the time. So I was out $150 for the calculator and another $150 to change the combination, getting a locksmith to change out the lock. This is 2003 money, so it's a bit more than now. To anyone who has ever had to buy a TI-86 in 2003 or 2004, you'll know how much the things cost. Well, my dad was drinking buddies with one of the county detectives. I'll call him Detective Buddy or Uncle Buddy. He went in to talk to the school about these string of thefts going on so he could get the security camera for the day my calculator went missing and got completely brushed off as it was a non-existent problem and he must have given out his locker combination. The principal told him he would need a warrant to get the camera footage. Then when he got the warrant, the school fought the warrant in court citing student privacy. Cue the ProRevenge. Detective Buddy shows up at our house with a laptop in a laptop bag. He's like, throw this in your locker and tell everyone you know about your brand new laptop. Okay. Sure, Uncle Buddy. 3 days later I show up at my locker between classes and the laptop is gone, the bag too, nowhere to be seen, as is a 24-ounce bottle of Coke, and possibly some pens. I take my phone out and text him that the laptop got taken. Stand by for the shit show. Oh, and you reported the theft to the police, FYI, he replies back. Okay, I reply confused. I got about the rest of my day and I don't hear anything back. The following morning Detective Buddy comes to the school with 3 uniformed officers and pull a student, Dave, out of class as well as his mom who works in the front office. The principal is pissed. I don't actually hear the cops, but the principal is pissed to no end that he had the audacity to accuse them of theft and he couldn't just take them out of his school ECT. Well, turns out there was a tracker in the laptop bag and Uncle Buddy got a warrant to search a particular house. The laptop had a value of over $1,000, making it a felony. The next afternoon he set up a tent with a table just outside of school grounds. He also had a banner across the top, if you have had something stolen from your locker, see me. By the next morning Dave and his mom made the paper. Apparently Dave allegedly used his mom's login information to get onto the school network and get the locker combinations for basically everyone, then he just opened random lockers looking for valuables to steal, if he didn't get info of a specific locker to steal from. When he set up the stand to get more people reporting thefts, he racked up an astounding number of charges. Each locker counted as a separate misdemeanor unless the stolen object was worth more than $1,000, in which case it was a felony. In less than a week Uncle Buddy opened and broke an investigation and they charged Dave and his mom with 9 felonies and 35 misdemeanor charges. When I finally got the story from Buddy, he explained what the situation was. He had me stash a brand new laptop that had a GPS tracking unit stuck in it in my locker, then get it stolen deliberately, and then he got a warrant to search the property it had been taken to. Now the fun thing to stress is that the laptop was over $1,000 value, pushing the theft from a misdemeanor into felony level. There was also another 8 felony charges, stuff like jewelry that was stolen from other people's locker and recovered. So any of the locker break-ins that amounted to over $1,000 stolen was a felony charge and less than $1,000 was a misdemeanor charge. Cool thing was that because the calculator and the laptop were separate days, and the combination changed between the days, he caught a felony and a misdemeanor charge off me alone. The 9 felony thefts ended up in the $12,000 range total, and the 35 misdemeanor charges were somewhere in the range of $3,000 total in value. Now that's an awful lot of stuff stolen, but I need to stress that this is only what was proven stolen. Like, this is what they caught him with in his possession that they could trace back to someone. They also didn't let them plead to anything. It was Pageantville's highest profile crime in years and without a doubt one of the worst crime sprees the county had seen in decades. Next up on the revenge. Everyone who had been charged $150 get their locker combinations changed sued the school district in a class action lawsuit. The justification was that the school did nothing to investigate the 44, proven, and more than likely 200+ cases of locker theft and then charged money to get the locker combinations changed. There was 218 people in the class and in total everyone got $85 after attorney's fees. The principal also lost his job for being a bonehead and not bothering to attempt to deal with the massive problem that was reported to him going on at the school. The fun thing I need to point out is that the school brought in a locksmith to change out the locks, that's why they justified charging $150. Well, the school already paid the $150 a locker, but they also had to return $100 per locker, meaning that they were out $21,800 plus their legal fees for that class action suit. Next comes the criminal trial and the fallout. The prosecutor's deal was 10 years in prison, 5 in juvie and 5 in adult prison, for Dave and 15 for Dave's mom. Well, they refused that deal and it went to trial. Dave got 1 year prison for each felony, the state minimum, and 1 month probation for each misdemeanor. So 9 years plus 35 months of probation. His mom received 18 years of jail and 6 years probation. Having attended much of the best parts of the trial, I will say this. They had Dave on camera entering 20 plus lockers and they had them in possession of stolen goods for every single charge they made against them. The judge was also not amused that there was likely other reported crimes that they got away with because they couldn't prove it or they weren't reported. Dave's mom got it worse. That was a fun sentencing to show up for. But the most important thing is that I got my graphing calculator back. It had my name engraved inside the battery compartment. I still have it as well as a cool story to tell. I was called an ungrateful brat, so I acted as such, by user Hunderkerg. This whole thing happened a year prior, but the repercussions are still happening, and I hope they continue until the day the bastard dies. This will be long, so buckle in. Background. Growing up, me and my sister had no love toward our father whatsoever. I'm not gonna bore you with details, but alcoholic, abusive, violent are the few that come to mind. When my sister got accepted into a much better but also further high school than our local, she moved immediately and rarely visited. We were 10 years apart, so I was 4 at that time. I grew up resenting her for leaving me to deal with his BS all by myself, but now I understand better and we're on good terms. My local factory was so big that it supported my whole town. Virtually everyone worked there, so everyone knew each other. My parents too, but then it's purchased by the Defense Ministry and they decided to cut off anyone without at least a high school degree. My mother was let go, and this was after she'd had me 4 months. My father, however, made it until retirement and was granted military status. Basically, they gave him an honorable rank so his pension would almost double, but also you'd have to act accordingly because, in terms of speaking, you're military personnel now. My childhood was absolute nightmares, so needless to say I turned out to be an absolute mess. Anger management and mental instability are notably the worst and I'm still working on them. When I turned 18, I enlisted. 2 major benefits: it didn't cost money and I could never come home if I didn't want to. For me, it was literally a highway out of hell. Fast forward 3 years later, I got an honorable discharge. Turned out I had actual mental problems, who would have known? I got a bulk load of money and even more in the following months when they were able to process my military insurance. I came home to find my town incredibly underwhelming and my father hadn't changed a bit. Not wanting to spend the rest of my life in this hellhole, I took what I could and moved to the city where my sister was living. The last words dear old dad said to me was, "You'd never make it," because apparently, being discharged for a mental illness showed that I was a coward. Also, I think he didn't like that I was tougher than the boy who used to obey his every word that I once was, and that I'd stood up for myself more in the few weeks I've stayed with him than the entire 18 first years of my life. I moved to a new environment, took up a blue-collar job, I was pretty beefy thanks to the military, and decided to pursue a career in IT, all the while taking care of my mental health. When it all started. Somewhen during this time, he got diagnosed with cancer. I was told it was not dangerous, but operations were required. My sister had actually reconciled with him, partly because of my mother, a few years prior, and would occasionally bring my niece home to visit them. She was quite successful, so she decided to pay for the whole thing. Operations, treatment, hospitals, recoveries, it was all hers. She paid for this while moving into a new house and buying her first car. Those things are pretty expensive in my country. My father had a huge bank account because of his pension, but he didn't have to pay a single penny. After a year or so he's on recovery, and all in all, things were good. During this time I was struggling with working and studying, living paycheck to paycheck, and had to rely on a social program to get treatment for my illness. I visited him after every operation, though it wasn't anything tearful. If he didn't poke me, I was fine. After nearly a year of staying at my sister's house, he and my mother headed home after his doctor gave him a go. At that time I was looking for a new job because the current job was horrible and it made my mental health actually worse, and I was lucky to find one where most of my skills were transferred and I had enough time to finish my studying. One day my mother called in tears and asked me to come home that weekend. She told me that my father had been seeing someone else. Now I must admit I'd not put anything behind this man, but then I thought she was paranoid, she still is, up to this day, about everything, and I resented the thought of going home on a 4 hours trip both just for something that's utterly unimportant. So I calmed her and swept it under the rug. Fast forward a few months, I got another call, this time from my sister. She came to visit that week with my niece to inform them that she was 3 months pregnant. What was supposed to be a happy union turned into an absolute shit show. Apparently, when my father left his phone unattended for a few minutes, his mistress sent him a very sexy picture and my mom saw it pop up. Needless to say, all hell broke loose. My sister said that was the first in many years that she saw my mother screamed bloody murder at my father, and when he tried to hit her, my sister threw herself in between, which prompted her husband to throw himself in between, because, you know, she's 3 months pregnant. It all ended in a very teary trip back to our city after hours of hurling insults at each other. The only good thing that came out of it was my mother somehow was able to bring his phone with her. We convinced my mother to get a divorce, but she's the submissive housewife who thought divorces were worse than boiling live puppies, and I think back then she's still somewhat hoping that he'd turn around. They've been together for almost 35 years at that point, so I figured something must have been there. She didn't want it, so we dropped it and decided to cut him out for good. And behold, half a year after the incident, my father's side of the family started to contact me. I have a strict no-call policy where the only people allowed to call me outside of work hours are my mother, my sister, her husband, 3 of my best friends, and only recently, my boyfriend. So to my bamboozlement, my father, his sister, my aunt, his mother all called within a day. They suddenly acted so nice and convinced me to come to visit them. Obviously, that was all a ruse. After the incident, my father's side all blamed my mother and said she should have kept it a secret and not made a mess for the family's sake. They also disavowed me and my sister because we were ungrateful brats after we did not accept their ultimate argument, he's your father after all. Out of morbid curiosity, I ventured back alone to see what it was about. Turned out, they wanted to sell his house. It was on my grandmother's land. Back when he was about to undergo his first operation, we didn't know how it'd turn out, so he transferred the house to my name because apparently, inheriting a dead person's estate in my country is a living nightmare. Out of convenience, we convinced my grandmother to give me the land as well since she was very old, 80, at the time. This was back when we were on good terms. I knew for sure they would rather gouge their eyes out than follow up with any of that if it had happened a year later. I smelled something in the air, I couldn't place it but I knew it was there. So I told them, nicely, that I would think of it and immediately went back, faking an emergency. A plan formed when I was driving back, and that's the first time I'd been so pleased about anything I actually cracked a smile. I went to my sister's immediately, my mom had been staying with her, and laid out a plan. After a year living in the city, my mom was much more open-minded and it only took a few convincing for her to agree with the plan. The plan. My sister contacted a lawyer and asked what our options were. Because both the house and the land were in my name, they had no claim to them, and any paper that didn't have my signature on it would be considered useless under the law. They could try and claim it was rented out, but then they'd have to move far away in hope that I'd never be able to locate them, and I knew it'd be too much trouble for a couple of old folks. They could claim it's his life achievement, but because he and my mother never divorced, it's technically half hers as well. This is when I came up with an idea. I asked the lawyer what if my mother filed for a divorce. He said it's highly unlikely the court would reward my mother's full claim unless we could prove that he was unfaithful before the separation. To his surprise, I could. Remember the phone that my mother brought back from that day? It was smashed during the fighting but generally, still in one piece. She asked me to throw it away a few days after, but my lazy ass just brought it back to my place and threw it in the loft. Sufficient to say it provided us with more than enough proof of his indecency. The execution. After weighing our options, I called to inform my father that I would come home the next month to make an announcement. He was eager to hear it. Upon my arrival, they were so nice and sweet and whatnot, but after I introduced my lawyer it's like they flipped a switch and suddenly became vile and violent. I presented him with 2 options, relinquish any claim to the house, or be served with a lawsuit. In my country, marital violations are 6 months probation minimum, up to 2 years in prison. After a lot of screamings and name-callings and feet-stomping tantrums he kicked us out, so naturally, I assumed he chose the latter. At the first hearing my mom, me, and my lawyer were present. It turned out to be another screaming contest in which he made up all kinds of lies about my mother. At some point, my lawyer leaned in to tell me that if the officer didn't stop his rantings, it's likely that they were buddies and asked me to let him handle things. The officer told us this case wasn't a priority, it would take months to process, we wouldn't like the paperwork, it's best to settle this out of court. My lawyer politely declined and told my father to expect another hearing soon, under much less friendly circumstances. He tried one more tactic in between, which was calling all the relatives and telling them how my mother was a bitch and I was an ungrateful brat in hope of creating some kind of pressure on us. Very few of them took his side, and even if all of them did, I would have never let him go that easy. In the second hearing, he finally cracked and agreed to my terms, which were relinquishing any claim he might have with the house and divorcing my mom. Basically, the only person who has any claim to the house now is my mother. I agreed to let him keep living in it for the rest of his life though, but not anyone else, aka his mistress whom he was basically living with. The revenge. This was where my work started. First, my sister gathered all the receipts from all the medical billings she has paid for his treatment. A few of them were missing, but we were able to put up a huge folder. I also shit my pants learning how expensive cancer treatment could be. Not a fan. When we had a general sum of the money we billed him for it. This is very unethical in my country since children are expected to take care of their parents, but we threw that out the window long ago. We also knew it was not a criminal case, so we just went to small court claims and then sent in bailiffs to collect, which was just this lady. She went on with an I don't give a fuck attitude, and when he failed to comply, she sent in the thugs, I mean the police, to start seizing assets. So say goodbye to wooden furniture, a 27i smart TV, a fridge, and a reclining massage chair. All were bought by my sister as well. He had to pay out of his pocket because that lady insisted they continue seizing whatever he bought until she saw the money. Although the final amount was halved, my mother, under the eyes of the law, shared half of that for some reason. It still cost him 70% of his saving. Of course, this wasn't about the money, we were just petty. We told the moving company they could do whatever they wanted with the furniture. Looking back, I should have taken the recliner because my back hurts like a bitch even though I'm only in my late 20s. After that was done, I contacted my local factory to file a report. Remember the sweet pension he got with the condition that he behaved accordingly? Clearly, someone had been a bad boy. They let him go with it even though it was a small town and everyone knew everything because nobody ever filed a report, but that's not the case anymore. I gave them a very detailed folder with pictures from his phone. To say they were sexual was an understatement. They immediately set up a hearing and he was stripped of his rank, making his pension down to just over half of the original amount. I know this because old folks gossip like their lives depends on it, and my mother is not excluded. She was very happy hearing about that, it's all she talked about in a month. I was about to be done here, but a week later, my sister called to tell me that my aunt came to her door to berate her and her children. My sister was working from home. My mom also lived there but had gone out for some reason. My sister just called security to kick her out and warn me she could go for me next. I was seeing blood, not because of some lame-ass Karen that could cause me inconveniences at most, but because she was screaming at my niece and nephew. As a gay man, I know full well the bloodline ends with me, so I put all of my love into those little guys, to the point that if I had been there, I would have bitten her head off. So I dug a little and found out my aunt was knees-deep in debt. She was hoping she could leech some money off my father, if not from the money he made selling the house then from his big bank account. Since neither of those was available anymore, she was very angry and thought she could lay it on my sister. You wanna know what a man could do with determination and raging hatred? I never set up an online social presence, mainly because up to my 18th birthday I was too poor to have a phone, and then the military taught me it wasn't needed. But, for this special occasion, I made an exception. I created a Facebook account and befriended her. I didn't even have to pretend to be anyone since old people apparently accept friend requests from anyone. She had this vibe where she'd show off her money and her vacations and her items, like a wealthy person. From my mother and her trusty gossip circle, I knew that she always told whoever she owed money that she was struggling. So I figured she must be blocking them. The next part was easy. I just had to send all of her selfies to everyone she's owing to. I didn't have to declare myself since I was literally on a throwaway account, so it's just this really long line of messages that showed my aunt spending her money lavishly. For the next following month, she was threatened, not with legal actions like I did, but with much more sinister actions. She would have thugs, not the police, throw gifted at her door like paint, fish sauce, and sometimes, literal shit. My mother also told me this, of course. She finally figured out what I was gonna do when I told her to find me a list of all the people she's owing to. The ProRevenge. As much as I want to take credit for this, the idea wasn't mine. Forgive me, for I once again had to lay out a bit of background. My father's side of the family is this very traditional family where you would have a person acting as the head of the family deciding things that matter. This was way before the war, so obviously they don't do such things anymore. But the head of the family still has a certain voice, and there's this once-in-a-year ceremony where we gather together to pay tribute to our ancestors. During the ceremony, the head of the family will give a speech, and then some announcements like who died, who got married, who gave birth, etc., etc. Then there will be a celebratory party where we basically get shit-faced drunk. My great-grandfather was the head. He had 3 sons and 2 of them died during the war, so my grandfather took the mantle, then my father, and eventually, me. This whole side of the family is in another town that's like 3 hours away from our town, mainly because my grandfather didn't expect to be the head, so he moved out seeking opportunities. I found these gatherings redundant and unnecessary, but that year I was actually looking forward to it. My father tried to keep the actual date hidden. It wasn't fixed, but generally, somewhen between June, but he seriously underestimated my mother. She doesn't have a gossip circle, she has an infinite number of them. So my mother, me, and my sister's family all head back for it. The trip was 14 hours in total, but the result was worth it. We timed it so we would come 2 days earlier than my father, again thanks to her gossip circle. This side of the family had never heard the full story before, only the version my father gave them, which was that he and my mother left in good faith. I actually gave my father some credits for not bad-mouthing my mom. After weighing all the pros and cons, we decided to let my mother loose, and she's exceptional when it came to relaying details about her personal tragedies. I kid you not, if I had posted her story, word for word, by this time next week there would be a global Justice for Thunderkirk's mother movement. It took just 1 day for everyone to know what an asshole my father had been. The look on his face when he arrived, with my aunt and my grandmother, and saw my family already there was priceless. He got the stink eye from everyone for the rest of the day. Nobody would initiate conversations with him, so he's just sitting there like a sad dog. Now I know what they said about dead horses, but this idea was brilliant not to follow through. My uncle, let's call him Oliver, came up with this. In the hierarchy, he's equal to my father, and in the event that my branch doesn't have a male successor, 100% what's going to happen, his branch will be the head of the family. He told me I should take up the mantle of the head. It was very sudden, I didn't have a speech ready. My father was supposed to do that, but Oliver told me I could just tell whatever I want because nobody really paid attention to that thing anyway. All the other elders were okay with it. The speech wasn't even the best thing. At the celebratory party, people will be assigned tables based on the family tree. Heads of each branch will sit together, their children sit together, the elders sit together, so on and so forth. Because I was elevated to the head of my branch, I would be sitting at the big boy table. My father didn't even get to sit at my supposed table because miraculously, it was full, even though I could have sworn there weren't 20 of us and each table can sit up to 10. He had to sit at the regular table, with my aunt, and a bunch of nasty widows who didn't hold back on their snarky comments, so I was told. I don't think he'll ever come back to one of those anytime soon. The aftermath. My father is now just a miserable old man. His mistress left him because surprisingly, she was after his money. He's living in our old house with next to nothing. His retirement money, though halved, was good enough for him to live by. Last I heard, his cancer has come back, and obviously this time my sister won't be paying for it anymore. He had tried to initiate contact with my mother, trying to make amends. We had to block his number and his profile on my mother's account because she actually considered it. She has her soft sides. My aunt has to sell her house to pay for all the debt, or else they'd just continue harassing her. She now lives in a small house she bought off with the rest of her money. I felt bad for her husband because he's actually chill and quite nice, but he's not the most decisive and therefore doesn't really confront her. I hope he's doing better. I have no empathy for her only son though. Let's just say the apple doesn't even fall from the tree. How do I know all of this? My mother's gossip circle. I left my grandmother out of this because she's very old. She's not demented in any way, she's perfectly sane, but she loved her son too much to admit he's in the wrong. Also, she was very nice and sweet to me growing up, a lot of my good memories are with her. I'm sad because she doesn't see my mother the same. I also stopped talking to her, and would only visit once during Lunar New Year. She's lived in the small house she and my grandfather built, on the land that's now in my name. When she and my father are dead I will carry out her wish, to build an altar for her and my grandfather. Whether or not my father will be included is still up to debate. TLDR, father cheated on mother so I took his house, his saving, his furniture, and his life circle. Just to clarify, all of this wouldn't have happened if he had acted in good faith. He could have called all of us back, announced that he'd be leaving my mother, and I wouldn't have given a damn. Instead, he was trying to scream and punch his way through it, so I acted in response. Also, I deleted that Facebook account. I'm crazy but not that crazy. Edit, fix the TLDR. Also, thanks kind strangers for the award. Also, about the small court claim, as I've mentioned these kinds of claims are highly unethical in my country, so the law is also very slippery. You just have to prove that someone owns your money for something, it doesn't have to be big. I made it sound easy but in reality, we had to go through 3 different hearings. The judge advised us to settle out of court the first 2 since my father wasn't present. The whole thing took almost a year before our claim was rewarded. My sister gave birth to my nephew around this time. In short, we found a loophole and utilized it. Also, yes, I'm Vietnamese. Infidelity is definitely a crime here. In fact, it's the first time I've heard it's not a crime somewhere else, so thank Reddit for this newfound knowledge. Also, clearly, this wasn't a spur of the moment. I have thought about it, like what we should do if things turned out messy. But nothing concrete because of my mother's disapproval. We didn't just wake up and decided to scorch the earth. Pops makes dirty thieves literally eat shit, by user objective_uncount. I have really loved sharing stories about my pops, my grandfather, the man who raised me, and I think I would share another story of Pops just being Pops. Pops lived on the family farm his entire life and that's where this takes place. It's mine now. The farm itself is huge, 80 acres of grazing and hay production land. Pops mostly raised cows and chickens and another 120 plus acres of forest marsh and wetlands. Up near the main house Pops had his veggie and berry garden, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, all the berries Pops liked to make his own homebrew, blame the Irish DNA. One fine summer morning, August of 2001, Pops is returning from town and he is greeted by a couple in their 30s hauling ass to their car parked at the front of our property, each with 40L buckets. Pops checked out what had been going on. Almost half the berry bushes had been stripped clean. Pops was not the type to fly off the handle, but he took a trip into town to look for the car and he found it. It was a couple of out-of-towners and Pops have them a stern warning not to come back. The next morning Pops was doing his normal start of the day routine, make breakfast, wake me up to do chores. As we got out Pops saw them again hauling ass back to their car. Pops jumped into his truck, caught up to them and told them off, said if they ever come back it's going to be hell for them. We woke up the next day to find tire tracks on the field and each and every berry bush stripped clean. We later found out they had been hitting up farmers markets selling fresh berries. Pops not being the kind of person to take things laying down, especially if someone's fucking with his future booze. There's a lot Pops did to ensure he was protected for the future, but I am going to give you the short version. Pops decided to expand his berry operation to the entire field as well as get the farm licensed to produce and sell berries. In early September, I remember this well. Made me do half the work. We filled the entire front field, planted several hundred strawberry, raspberry, blackberry, blueberry bushes. One thing, they are perennial plants. The season they are planted will be a very light fruiting, but the next growing season they explode. Pops fenced off half the field and left a good portion open, easy access. Pops knew they would be back next year. He knew they believed they found a golden goose, free money. Well, the start of next growing season, Pops had a special fertilizer ready for the open part of the field. Raw human waste. Now the thing about spraying the soil and plants with that is it's not treated. Even cow fertilizer is treated. But in its raw state, the plants being sprayed daily, well, it will make the berries putrid. It gets deep in them and no amount of washing will get it out. And Pops sprayed every bush on the not fenced inside every damn day and waited. And as Pops predicted, summer of 2002 they came back. He caught them again, buckets in hand, hauling ass back to the car. Again Pops confronted them with a stern warning they will regret eating the fruit. It wasn't even 24 hours later they were back, this time with the law in tow, screaming up a fury that Pops tried to poison them. Pops just smiled and said, "I warned you not to come on my land and steal from me, then berries ain't for eating." The cops were about to tell them to just fuck off and not come back when Pops said, "Oh wait a minute." Pops came out with all his licenses packed in a neat little file folder, licensing his land that was already zoned for agricultural use as a licensed food production farm. The cops' eyes lit up like, "Oh, I know what you're getting at. You see, up here in Canada it's a bit of a big crime to steal from a farm, even more so if it's got all the licenses to produce food." At this point I was out on the porch watching everything go down. "Man," the law screamed at them to sit their asses down while he called backup. They were taken off our land in cuffs. So not only did they get a mouthful of human waste-filled berries, but walked out getting over a $10,000 fine. TLDR, berry thieves get a mouthful of human waste and a nice big fine. I orchestrated a vast conspiracy to get a coworker fired, by user crafty_bureaucrat. Using a throwaway because the details are specific and hard to change. I used to work at a hospital data center in the network operations group. We physically sat in a room 24/7 next to the servers to make sure things didn't catch on fire, monitored for alerts, and did routine things like swap out tape backups, but it was pretty simple work. This was ostensibly a tech job, but there were people who had been there for many years back when you had to change out printer paper and run a command from an IBM mainframe. It was on really specialized hardware and software that was difficult to apply elsewhere, so it had become a dead-end job. And because there were people who weren't tech-savvy at all really, we weren't given much responsibility. You can't tell some people they can log into a server and others not, so we were reduced to the lowest common denominator. We were a network operations center where nobody was allowed to interact with any network equipment. Lowest common denominator, you say? Meet my new supervisor, Karen, not her real name but definitely her real spirit, had been there for over 20 years and got the job solely based on seniority. She was a sociopathic narcissist and one of the most unpleasant people I've ever encountered. Shortly after I was hired, we were bought by another hospital and combined data centers. Karen was demoted to shift lead and had to work with us in the 24/7 rotation. She was very bad at her job and our responsibilities diminished to very little. We had no agency to fix any problems of our own because it had to be a problem that Karen could solve, and Karen was both lazy and stupid. After a couple of years, I was promoted. On my first day after they announced the promotion, she said, "You will fail." Just straight to my face. But she had a powerful tool at her disposal, the hospital bureaucracy. Since the place was unionized, the hospital had a just cause firing policy instead of an at-will policy, even for non-unionized employees. This is, I think, generally a good thing. But on the edges, it set up ridiculous situations where it was impossible to lose your job unless you were really egregious about it with repeated violations or you showed up drunk/high. We had someone steal computer equipment and they kept their job. It was nuts. And Karen had been there for nearly 30 years. So she wasn't getting fired without a lot of work. That's okay. She was terrible at her job. One of the most important things about the job was monitoring for an alert which would pop up, and there was a procedure we had to go through in order for some data to go through. If we didn't do this, then a nurse wouldn't get their lab results back. So in one case, an alert came in, Karen saw it, then decided to keep browsing the web. Because of this, a patient from the cardiac ICU was going into surgery and the doctors/nurses operating on the patient couldn't get a white blood cell count, I think. I'm not a doctor, I just work in a building with a lot of them. Something very dangerous for this patient, and the patient died. This still did not get Karen fired. The reasoning from HR, well, it didn't directly lead to harm. She didn't even feel bad about it. Just a complete soulless sociopath. I'm real pro-worker in general, but some jobs you just absolutely have to do. I was so mad. She had to go. I kept a paper trail of everything she messed up on. It wasn't nitpicky. Literal life and death stuff here. Verbal warning, first written warning, second written warning, final written warning, termination. A slog, and I'd rather spend my time doing anything else, but that's the way it went. Then she figured out she could work the system. As she approached work Armageddon, termination, she would tell HR she was being harassed, the person harassing her was different every time, which would trigger a mandatory investigation. This investigation took about 6 months, they wouldn't find anything, and we would carry on. Except these warnings? They had a 6-month expiration. So she could always reset the clock when it got close. Everyone was helpless. Even the CIO couldn't do anything about it because of the bureaucracy. Karen was a menace and the entire IT department had to interact with the data center staff, and that meant interacting with her, and she was universally disliked. And she had 20 years until retirement and she would outlast the heat death of the universe. Then I had an idea: what if, under the guise of developing skills relevant to the 21st century, required everyone working in the Network Operations Center to pass the NetAnd exam? It's not a difficult exam, but it's not trivially easy. I felt pretty sure that everyone on the team fell above the line between able to pass and not able to pass except Karen. We would give everyone better titles, a significant pay raise, and entrusted to do more with the equipment, which is something everyone desperately wanted. Then people could actually leave the hospital with transferable skills and do something else if they wanted and not feel trapped. I spent 3 years in meetings with HR, with my director, with the CIO, with HR again. Job description meetings that took 6 hours to tweak small wording. Hundreds of hours in meetings. Red tape hell. Absolute red tape hell. Do you have any idea what it takes to approve a significant raise in a bureaucratic muck factory like that? But the raises were crucial because it would absolutely not be fair to ask this of them. Pass a test or lose your job without a large carrot attached would lead to mutiny. And then it got approved. I also wrote the exam requirement into my own job description. It was important to still be able to do the job and not let my skills lapse just because I was promoted. Also, this meant I could cover for people when they were on vacation or sick. Plus, I also got that sweet pay bump. It went over well. I was nervous, but the plan made sense and I was able to communicate that. People would be more marketable. The job would be more interesting. And most importantly, they would be making 20% more than they were before. And I think it really helped that I also gave myself the same requirement when I absolutely could have chosen not to. The hospital would pay for off-site training. They would still get paid their full hourly during the training, including shift differential for second and third shifts. We paid for all the materials. I scheduled 8 hours a week for people to go someplace quiet and study. The job itself had a ton of downtime so people could study, but this was formally carved out time anyway. We paid for the exam. And if they failed, we'd pay for the second attempt. We were given 8 months to pass the test, so this is how it was for the 8 months. I did not want Karen to have any excuse whatsoever and somehow convince HR that this process was rushed or unfair. Everyone passed on the first attempt except Karen. Karen did not pass her second, or her third attempt, a bonus attempt. Karen, being the classic narcissist, thought this was somehow all about her. That this was a vast conspiracy engineered over multiple years and hundreds of hours just to get rid of her, and she would tell everyone within earshot that's what was going on. Yeah, okay, Karen. You realize how insane that sounds, right? Not everything is about you, sheesh. Well, okay, in this case it is, but still. Only I, and 2 other people, know that. I remember the exact time and date we told her. She was in such deep denial that it could ever happen. She thought she was bulletproof. I don't think I will ever achieve anything more satisfying in my career. I'm not usually one to take satisfaction in seeing someone's livelihood go, but she was uniquely awful. She was a patient danger, and it had been nearly a decade of working with her by this point and I was just so sick and tired of her bullshit. I was a hero the day after she was fired. I went to the main office for a meeting and people were congratulating me like I just had a kid or won a marathon or something. Even the CIO. They were just happy for me that I didn't have to supervise Karen anymore. But in my headcanon, they were congratulating me for pulling off this elaborate plan. Morale back at the data center was also high. We learned interesting things. A couple of my co-workers left for better gigs elsewhere, smiley face, the ones who were content staying were able to stay, and we all had more money and job security. And because anything could set off a bullshit Karen harassment complaint, people were stressed out working with her. Her being gone was like a breath of fresh air. Newcomers were told stories of Karen, and they seemed exaggerated. They were not. In order to solve a very important and extremely difficult problem, I pulled off a vast workplace conspiracy that improved the lives of the people I worked with in addition to keeping our patients safe. Getting Karen fired is my greatest and most difficult accomplishment and I can't put it on a CV anywhere. Sad face. I was told to do what I needed to do so I did it, by user Kentner 4212. This is very recent. I was living in a very bad part of a major metropolitan city that has lots of bad parts. After I moved in, I started noticing a lot of things that were unsafe. Most of the things, I brushed aside because they didn't necessarily affect me. 3 things I complained about were the fact that the common areas in most of the bedrooms had no smoke detectors. Then, because I get home when it's very dark, I complained about the porch lights not working. I was promised over and over that this would be fixed, but it never was. I pressed harder and threatened to call the city. I also withheld my rent to this point. The landlord, female, told me, "There's nothing wrong with the house. Do what you need to do." So, I did. I called the city. An inspector came out and I showed him around the property. There were areas I couldn't give him access to, like the garage or the other tenants' rooms. He took lots of pictures and pointed out dozens of safety issues and building code violations. Turns out, this slumlord, referring to the owner, converted a 2-story house, 4 BED, 2 BATH, into a 3-story house with 9 bedrooms and 9 bathrooms with no permits from the city. He, the owner, also had the home classified as an owner-occupied, single-family home, although it was clearly not, as there was no owner occupancy and there were 10 unrelated roommates. The landlord, female, harassed me through the whole process. She took my parking spot away and pitted other roommates against me. To make matters worse, she told everyone I wasn't paying rent. So, now I have these bitches ganging up on me. It was so bad that I couldn't be in any of the common areas for even 1 minute without being harassed. I also got a bunch of notices accusing me of random things and an eviction notice because I wasn't paying rent. The report from the city came out and it had over a dozen violations, including some very serious ones. It was going to cost him tens of thousands of dollars to repair the house to get it up to standard. The house started to become safer. There were smoke detectors, railings for the stairs, working porch lights, a carbon monoxide alarm, and he was forced to put a railing on a balcony that had none. Through all of this, he's, the owner, making $10,000 per month in rent, charging for parking, and there's another large house on the property that he's renting. Plus he, the owner, has multiple homes, 90 tenants in total. This guy, the owner, was making tons of money, but somehow the sentiment among some of the roommates was, "How could you do this to this poor old man, the owner?" My case went to court and I got more time to find legal help. By the time the second hearing came along, another notice had been given as they got access to the entire house. Plus, they were still in violation and had not cured all of the problems, so they got fined daily. Then my court date was a week away and his attorney started to try and negotiate with me. I was asking for $16,000 and they knew I was going to get it because they were going to lose. I ended up settling for $7,000 and 30 days to move out, plus 8 months of rent forgiveness. I just did what I had to do. LOL. Edit: some people are calling this post fake because of the fact that I've referred to a male and a female in my post. The landlord/manager is female and the owner is male. It's pretty common for the owner of a home to hire someone to manage the properties, especially since this owner has 90 tenants. I'm not sure what's so suspicious about that. So now, I've gone through and put notes throughout my post to help the people with reading comprehension issues who are so stuck in every little detail that they are missing the big picture. Hope everyone can stop complaining about this now. Edit: 2. I've learned a lot from the multiple times I've dealt with awful landlords. Living in Los Angeles with a huge problem with slumlords, you start to learn your rights and get sick of the shot and report it. So, I will always withhold rent if my rights are being violated or the house is unsafe and the owner/landlord refuses to do anything about it. And for those that are saying he got off easy, it's so much easier to get rent forgiveness than money. Many people advise against withholding rent, but it has worked in my favor every single time because it either got the landlord to make repairs or it got the landlord to take me to court and I got a settlement and rent forgiveness. Example. In this case, it was much easier for the owner to swallow $7,000 plus 8 months of rent forgiveness than $15,000. I originally asked for $16,000, so that's just $1,000 less, in essence, than what I asked for. So, no. He didn't get off easy here. It would be different if I was harmed by his neglect, but I wasn't. Plus, usually the only way you get money from an eviction case is by settling. Eviction judges are there to determine evictions, not give out money. Yes. There are exceptions, but I would have, most likely, won and not gotten evicted because I would agreed to move, but to get money, you usually have to take them to court separately and get a new attorney. It's so much easier to settle. In fact, at the initial hearing the judge orders you to go out in the hallway and negotiate before you go to plead your case. Judges much prefer when agreements are made. They also tend to throw out cases when the landlord and/or their attorney is trying to be manipulative and/or unreasonable and the tenant doesn't have legal representation. Judges hate to evict people, especially in Los Angeles. My ex reported me to the police for something I didn't do. She ended up with a criminal record, by user NMT48. Let me start with some backstory here. This took place back in 2018 to 2019 and no longer has any legal ramifications for me or the ex involved in this story, so I feel safe to tell it. My ex equals string. Me equals Nick. Public defender equals PD. Police officer equals PO. Let's begin. So I went to school with string. We were 1 or 2 grades apart. I can't remember now, it's been a while and a lot's happened since then. We ended up in a on-again off-again relationship for years starting from 2015 until August of 2018. This also takes place in the UK, that's important for later. She was most certainly not stable mentally, but at the same time, not fully unhinged either. Let's call her eccentric, shall we? So for years we were in this on and off relationship. There was a few months we had no contact with each other in that time and I wish it had stayed that way. I had become homeless in July of 2017 and as such I got placed in an independent living place 1 town over. I had previously unfound freedom. I had the ability to do what I want, when I wanted without questions. Now at the age of 16 and having no proper life experience, this was daunting. But I did what I do best. Be antisocial. I stayed at home when I wasn't at college and I would go shopping once a week. Often I would go shopping after I got off the bus from college so I didn't have to go out. Then one day I bump into string at the college I was at. Which at the time was kind of a surprise, kind of not. Because it was either my college here, go 50 miles up the road to the college Indiana the city, go to an agricultural college, or do another 40 miles south to another college in the south of the county, state for the Americans. Myself and string became friends again, we got to talking and spent some more time together and kept in contact. Come November I was no longer in college due to attendance. The living alone had really fucked with me mentally and my inability to sleep caused this to get worse. At some point in time I got put on antidepressants. I can't remember when, but it was in the early part of 2018. Partway through 2018 I get moved into a better apartment. I didn't share an apartment with another person. It was all to myself and I could have guests over. I couldn't work at this time due to financial fuckery. But that's not important to this story. Relationship progresses on for a few more months. Come March of 2018 she basically lays down the law and demands that I change my Facebook status to in a relationship with her. Now I wasn't too keen on doing that as I like to try and keep my privacy on Facebook. But it was either that, or no relationship. So me being the antisocial 18-year-old on antidepressants, I did her bidding and did it. This is the point where things starting to get worse. Not even a month later she proposes to me and I say no, because of age, and that's something that could be considered for later. She flips and I take it. Me being vulnerable and naive, I accept that maybe I was wrong and I should have said yes. So I said yes. Do you see the big neon red flags yet? Because I didn't. So in mid 2018 I got a large church event a couple states over for a huge gathering of churches in the UK. Now I am not religious, but I got a lot of support from my local church and they were some really nice people. So I go there with them. I tell string that I am going away for the weekend and I cannot be contacted due to me not knowing when I will be available. That sounds reasonable, right? Wrong. I was getting calls and texts like crazy. Over the span of the Saturday I got 32 calls and 72 text messages alone. I didn't know this because I had left my phone in our church's tent and I was away doing various activities. I came back around 2 p.m. to the tent to me being told my phone was going crazy. It was string. I answer the phone and it was a backlash of insane. Demanding where I was and why didn't I answer the phone, and just general anger from her. At this point I was starting to get frustrated with the constant phone calls and texts and demanding calls. A few of the people I was friends with even told me to get out of the relationship because of the damage it was doing to me and her behavior. Come to the evening of the Saturday I have had enough and many more missed calls later I call her back and tell her we are done. I couldn't do it no more. I put phone down and hung up. At this point I think it is all sunshine and roses and everything is better. Oh, how wrong was I? This is the point where the fallout begins. When I get home on Sunday night I turn my phone on. My phone has to take a good 10 minutes to get through the swamp of Facebook messages. The phone calls. The texts. The everything. Now this was around March time. I was coming into my final exam for my IT course and it was time to do coursework. I was avoiding her at college. She kept popping up. At this point I was working my ass off and I didn't have time for insane bullshit. I worked my way through my coursework and I passed the course no issues. So at this point we get back in contact, see how the red flag has turned into a neon red sign instead. I insist that we only remain friends. And we do only remain friends. We stay in contact and everything is working fine. I finish college in June 2018 and I stay home. I end up back in a relationship with her because again, I am naive. She said what happened before wouldn't happen again. That didn't last long, but I accepted it because I am alone a good chunk of my time. She would come to my apartment a few times a week and we would spend time together. This is important for later. At this point it's coming to August. I break it off again and it's a bit better this time. She still keeps calling and messaging me and I ask her to stop. I stopped going out to my bar, stopped going to church and just stopped going out altogether. Police were asked to do a welfare check on me because I went 3 weeks without leaving the apartment. Come the end of August I get my place on the level 3 IT course confirmed and I start preparing myself for the months ahead. Come the start of September things got worse. String is still calling and texting me, but this time it's from behind a private number. She was calling me all throughout the day. She went missing at one point and then just turned up at college. She was just getting worse and worse. Come October of 2018 I was at college and I was coping to get there and get things working for me. I was going the bar a few times a week like a normal 18-year-old living by themselves. She then walks in. She walks in with someone from my level 2 course. I think nothing of it. They know each other because of me. She starts full on making out with him whilst I am just stood playing pool at the other side of the bar taking no notice. But I can feel those daggers she was staring. I go to get myself a drink from the bar and the bartender asks what's going on. I ask them to move to the other side out of earshot. This was a bar that had a wall down the middle so the bar was split down the middle. I explain the shit with her and what's clearly now happening. Now the bartenders at this point jointly refuse to serve her at all. They have given me the safest place I can be. At the bar. I leave to walk home at 10 p.m. as I have college the next day. And whilst I am walking home I see she is following me at a distance. So I take some turns that don't go home and a 5-minute walk home takes 25 minutes and I call a friend for help. At this point it's October of 2018 and I am getting stuck into my IT course. Things are going well. Until it wasn't she was back at my college and appearing in the places I was. So I couldn't leave the classroom during breaks. So I had to go eat and go to the bathroom during class. My teachers understood the deal and didn't mind as long as my work was done. You rock Baza. The phone calls got worse and worse. I was having my antidepressants with alcohol at the bar and going home. I was being stalked by her at all times essentially. She would come to my town at roughly 4 p.m. and just follow me around. Turn up at my bar, turn up in places I would go and just generally too much coincidence. It progressed to the point where she was walking past my apartment at night and scream obscenities at my apartment and other people in the apartment block could hear it. Other people knew what was going on from the screaming obscenities alone. Come 2 more months of screaming, phone calls from behind a private number and texts, they stop in December. I couldn't believe it. 1 day no calls. 2 days. 4 days. A week. Nothing. I think I am safe. It's coming up to Christmas and I spend it alone playing Metal Gear Solid V and its DLC. I think I am free. I was wrong. We are now in January of 2019. I've not started college again yet. I am just sat at home on a Sunday evening quite happily listening to some Disturbed. I get a phone call from a private number but something told me to pick up. At 6 p.m. on Sunday the 6th of January I am being called by the police because String went to the police and accused me of stalking and harassment. I said that's a barefaced lie and she was the one doing it to me. I get asked when can I do an interview at the police station. I agree to the upcoming Thursday. I was informed that had I not answered the phone I would have had police at my door asking questions and taking me to a station for questioning. I go in for my interview on the Thursday. I am met by the police officer on the phone and the PD that I requested. I get taken aside and I get to see evidence presented against me. The PD basically tells me that the evidence against me was very weak and likely wouldn't hold up in a court but they have to investigate it anyways because it's been reported. After 20 minutes with the PD and my presenting counter evidence after counter evidence, I go in for the recorded interview. I give all the information and defend myself, and after half an hour with the PD and Po interviewing me, I breathe a sigh of relief. At this point PD and Po step out and I finish my coffee that was given. PD and Po walk back in and Po has a look of frustration and annoyance on their face. I get informed that the police have 6 months to investigate accusations of harassments from the point of initial accusation. Everything I said in the recorded interview basically dashed what String accused me of. And I was asked by Po if I wanted the police to chase her legally for what she accused me of. I said yes please, and I get contact information taken by Po. I get fingerprinted and walked out by Po and PD. A few days later Po calls me and asks me to submit evidence, and I do so. A 1-minute 30-second screen recording of just the call log on my phone, Facebook messages, and WhatsApp messages. I give everything I can. This was the second weekend of January. I get told it shouldn't take too long because of the evidence against String. I got told that a few weeks after I submit the evidence that she would be charged. That turns out to not be true. Things got dragged out badly. I have to submit myself for 2 more interviews and submit the evidence 3 more times. Come the first week of June, I am started to get worried. I get called to the local station again. This time it was for the making of an impact statement and another interview. It had been 5 months of investigation against me, and the Crown Prosecution Service told the police that they would no longer chase me. It had been 5 months and 2 weeks until I get the phone call I am waiting for. The investigation against String had been concluded and she was given a date in court. The entire time she was playing the victim and the innocent one. Now the court date was set for 8 days before the 6-month time limit was up. So it was on the edge. I get told it's only a hearing and that I don't need to attend. I choose to not attend because I don't need to. The afternoon of the 28th of June, I am reading the local newspaper website and I see that her name is on the website and she's pled guilty. But to what consequence? I was uninformed, but I was happy. A few days after the 28th, I get a phone call from Po and get told the following wonderful news. I get told that String pled guilty to the judge and was handing the following sentence. £110 in fines. 8-week courted order curfew, so she wasn't allowed to be out after 10 p.m., which the police was checked to make sure she was keeping to. And the best part. A 2-year court-ordered restraining order. This prevented her from contacting me either directly or indirectly. If she violated the restraining order, she could face up to 5 years in prison. I was finally free. I could breathe. I was safe. She now has this criminal record hanging over her head and now cannot escape from her actions. I am glad she got convicted because she finally met the consequences of her actions and she can't do it to anyone else, I hope. The restraining order stopped being in effect last year and now I am in a different country, so it would be very hard for her to do all of it again. I am now happily married and have a son who I love dearly. TLDR, don't stick your dick in crazy. Ex-girlfriend made false accusations, ends up with a criminal record that she can't escape. Sorry for the long post, thank you for reading.